Um, the the algorithm calculates an average performance rating, and it's not reflective of a team's best games or its worst set of games. The average performance rating usually falls somewhere in between. And every week we get questions related to, we beat so and so, how are they rated ahead of us? And by the end of the season, virtually every team's kind of beaten a couple teams ahead of them. They've also lost to a few teams behind them, and that's part of the difficulty of using head to head at times to have any weight. But it's pretty common. And back to, teams have bad games, teams have good games. Only current season game results. There's no historical data. There's no preseason, weighting of teams or leagues or divisions. Every team starts the season with a rating of 0. To go a step further, we actually wipe the rankings clean each week, and every team starts each weekly rankings with a rating of 0. All games are weighed equally, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, because early in the season that can mean something different than later in the season. But in theory, if a team's played 20 games, each game accounts for 1/20th of the rating. The rating math tab on the team info page, will break down that a team's performance on a game by game basis. We'll get into that into a couple slides as well. But the real kind of use and kind of, as I mentioned earlier in the slide, team ratings have meaning, if you will. And part of that is a 1-point rating difference equates to a theoretical 1 goal difference on the ice. And, that's kind of the key to unlocking, the benefits of MHR, if you will.
The formula itself is incredibly simple in explaining ratings. A team's rating is their strength of schedule plus their average goal differential. It's that simple. Your team rating is your SCED plus your AGD is how we've said it for years. And SCED, also seen, I'm sure in some other capacity in the rating ranking world, is SOS, strength of schedule. We've used SCED for 22 years, so we've just kind of stuck with it. And AGD is average goal differential. So the SCED is simply, and we have a math page that shows this, it's simply the average of all your game opponents' ratings. So what that does mean is if you played a team 5 times, it's for each game that you play it, it's added in, it's averaged out, and that's your strength of schedule. What it does mean is it can change even on weekends when your team doesn't play, because your opponents in previously played games, their ratings may change because some have good weekends, some have bad weekends. They move, and that can change your strength of schedule even when you don't play. And getting into, everyone's constantly changing week over week. Average goal differential doesn't change dynamically. It doesn't change if you didn't play this week. And again, it's a pretty straightforward calculation. The one little complexity there is it does use a maximum goal differential of 7 in any given game. So a 12-0 victory is 7, gets you credit for 7 goals. And not necessarily 12. So you can't necessarily take the number of goals scored minus the number of goals given up and divide that by the number of games, because some teams lose by more than 7 goals, and the maximum goal differential helps them, and other teams, maybe win more than they lose by that. And again, that's part of it. There's a perception that may have a little bit of truth to it that we penalize teams for blowing out an opponent's by only allowing a maximum of 7 goals. This is pretty common in rating systems. We do it. In theory, how can it hurt you? It can hurt you if the rating difference between the two teams, if their average, average performance ratings of the two teams are greater than 7 apart. You could beat them by 20 and you're only going to get credit for 7. But as Ian will later show you, that can potentially hurt your team's rating. Over the years, we've analyzed the impact of changing the number. Quite frankly, we found 7 to be the best overall number for striking the balance between overall system accuracy and promoting sportsmanship and player development on the ice. Early in the system, early in our first few years, we did modify it a couple times. We have been at 7, I believe, for 19 years, and believe pretty universally it's the right number overall. Again, very simple, just 2 components: average goal differential, SCAD. They are equal parts, despite the fact that the strength of schedule is often a number between like 70 and 90 for teams. And the average goal differential is from +5 to -5 for for 99% of the teams. Some people think that the schedule has strength of schedule has a much bigger component than average goal differential. I'll say pretty emphatically, it does not. They have equal components. And you can raise your strength of schedule by playing a very difficult schedule. It's going to have a yin-yang effect. You play a tough schedule, your average goal differential is going to go down. You play an easy schedule, your average goal differential is going to go up. In the end, the question is your team getting better and your ratings going up? Is your team getting worse and it's the two in combination. There's not one more important than the other. So what doesn't impact the team ratings? We've talked about what does, strength of schedule, average goal differential. What doesn't is maybe just as important. So there's no human subjectivity, no human bias. There's no coach's poll where we're adding in or using, scouts, people on the ground, scouts, whatever. Not doing that. We are calculating ratings data for 26,000 teams across North America. We are not collecting human input. Another slight point here is even when we disagree with the numbers, and every once in a while we look at it and go, I think this team is better than that team, usually at the top of the poll, but not the rankings, but not always. We don't have a way of manipulating it. We wouldn't do it if we could. We stick to what the numbers are. Even if subjectively we don't agree with them, we are consistent about the numbers being the numbers. What's not included, what's not part of this is a team's record, their winning percentage, or anything like that. So you can see maybe the 30th ranked tier 1 team in the country might have a losing record. And there are tons of teams behind them with winning records. Does not matter. Again, it is, the strength of your opponent and how well you do against them. And, that's kind of been the core to it for a long time. Now, winning can help your average goal differential, for example, but winning is not explicitly a part of the formula. Playing good teams close and losing can also help your rating. If you're playing them, appropriately close. So again, winning and losing is kind of irrelevant to our rating calculation process. What's not included is head-to-head. Games between two teams count like any other games. They go into the averages, but there's not some extra weighting. So by the end of the season, virtually every team has beat teams that are rated ahead of them, and they've lost the teams rated behind them, but there's no special extra weighting there. As it relates to league standings, tournament championships, we're not a league standings page. Our ratings often do not follow exactly league standings for various reasons. It simply does not do that. We are not trying to do that. That's not what this is about. And kind of a last point. Teams don't get extra credit for winning championships. I can accept that winning when it counts may matter, but we're not doing that. What it would require us to do is almost like weight tournaments. Which ones are important? How many extra credit points do you get for it, for what tournaments, etc. It could incentivize sandbagging, for example. We're just not going to go down that path. So you don't get extra credit for winning a tournament. Now, if you played good teams and you did really well, you're going to get the credit you deserve for those games, but they count equally like every other game.
No, good points, Neil. And I think one kind of follow up there is, you're using the term good teams and or strong competition, and that's all relative to where your team is based and what your team's rating is. If you're rated an 80, a good team may be an 83 or an 85. If you're a top team in the country, a good team's going to be another top team in the country. And so I think that's important to keep into perspective, depending on where your team falls in kind of the spectrum there. Kind of hopping into the math a little bit, and most of you are probably familiar with this page. But if you're not, it's the rating math tab on the team info page, and I kind of highlighted up there what you can click if you're not aware of this. You go to a team info page. The default is the games, but we also have a rating math tab here that kind of breaks down the math on a game by game performance. One of the cool things is math always checks out. And so down at the bottom, you can see like the averages row there, and there's goal differential, opponent rating, average points, and then plus minus. The plus minus should always be 0 or 0.01. There's sometimes some rounding errors that can cause, but that should almost always even out. If it doesn't, it likely means that there was a game score correction or there was a game score that's been deleted that is impacting the math tab, until the next update. The math is pretty simple. Your performance points, how your team performed in that game is simply goal differential plus opponent rating. So in that first game, we can see they lost by 3 and the opponent rating was 92. So their performance for that game was an 89.72. That plus minus column at the end is going to kind of show you what the Neil, it looks like some people are having some trouble seeing the slides. Hey Matt, can you make sure that the slides are, and maybe we need to showcase that, highlight the PowerPoint or something. Sorry guys, we'll try to get that sorted out, and if not, if you can't see it, shoot us an email after, and we'll get you a recording of the video or something to.
Yeah, I do apologize. Off the top of my head, I am not. I mean, it says I'm sharing my screen and it's up, Ian. So I apologize. I'm not full of ideas.
I see it online, and it could be browser specific. There could be ad blocks. There could be, different items. But we apologize to those who can't see it. We'll double check on our end, and if you still can't get anything, we'll shoot an email and we'll get you over a recording of it. Hopping back into the slide side, that last column is kind of the plus minus column, and it's how did your team perform in that game versus their average performance. And so you can kind of see in this game they performed close to 2 goals worse than average. That's likely made up at another point where they performed close to 2 goals better, and so that's kind of how it works there. The other thing, and Neil kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but is that 7-goal max, and kind of highlighted in the middle there. You'll see there's a game they won 12-1, but from a math perspective, they were only credited with a 7-goal win due to the maximum goal differential, and as a result, they actually ended up losing rating points in this game. You can see a negative 0.17 in the plus minus column. And ultimately, kind of what happened here was they played a team that was more than 7 goals worse than them. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but generally speaking, not a matchup we would recommend. Generally leads to non-competitive games like this. And in that case, when you do play a game like that as a higher rated team, you are negatively impacted if you're more than 7 goals, rated more than 7 points higher than that team. And so that is what you're seeing here. Obviously, negative 0.17 isn't hurting them too much. In fact, if Victory Honda has a good weekend or two here, that could actually switch from being a negative to a positive. So there's a lot that could still happen there, but just kind of wanted to point that out as Neil had kind of brought up earlier there. Back to when you do see those cases, generally means it wasn't going to be a good matchup from the start, and so there is a little bit of a penalty at times, but also kind of caps the mathematical damage. So.
And one quick point on the math here, Ian. This team has played 17 games. That 0.17 means it actually, you would divide that by 17 to get its overall impact on the team's rating. It means that game had an impact of 0.01 on their rating. Now, that might have made a ranking position change, but there's a good chance it did not, at the kind of higher levels of the tier 1 rankings. This looks like a good tier 1 team. I'm seeing the names of the opponents and going, this is a top, someone who's playing the top teams in the country. So they tied Shattuck St. Mary's, they played some other good games. So again, the impact is 0.01, probably no ranking, impact at all on that. So
no, good point, Neil. And go back real quick. I wanted to point out there was another game against the Jersey Rockets there. They actually lost 4-5. But the Jersey Rockets are kind of that strong competition that Neil was referring to. They played well against strong competition and actually received a positive performance rating for the game. So
despite the loss.
Yeah. So you can see all that. And back to it really breaks it down. I wouldn't get too caught up on one game here, one game there. The impact's pretty minimal. While it may have a larger impact earlier in the season, the impact's pretty minimal, over a 50 or 60 game season. So
good points, Ian. I'm going to switch to a slightly different topic, which is early season versus late season, and kind of how how the system works differently between the two. Quite frankly, early in the season, we got a small sample size. teams have played 5, 10, maybe 20 games. Late in the season, we're talking 30, 50, 70 plus games in some cases. Not sure that I'm a supporter of 70 to 80 games for youth hockey, but they're out there. And that sample size makes a big difference in overall accuracy of the data of the ratings data, but also indirectly, you know, there are teams that start out and maybe they're missing kids for football or soccer or something like that. They start the season slowly because of you know, could be injuries, could be kids missing for other sports, and um, it looks like it has a pretty big impact early on. Now, what happened, and when you played 5 games or even 10 games, again, a couple bad games is going to have an outsized impact kind of on your overall team rating. As the season goes on, you're going to have good games, you're going to have bad games. They're all going to kind of even themselves out over time. They're early in the season, we end up with some statistical islands. These are groups of teams that have played each other, may meet the minimum goal, minimum number of games required to be ranked, but they haven't played outside of that group. That's what we call a statistical island, and they, you know, it can lead to a lack of accuracy. We actually have a system to try to identify those. We spend a lot of effort trying to locate game scores for them, but they do impact, you know, the system to some degree. We don't see that late in the season. Late in the season, kind of everyone has played everyone through some level of separation. It's kind of like, you know, again, levels of degrees of separation. You know, early on, those statistical islands are geographic, and then some are like only league, like a division of a league is, we've got 10 games for all the teams, but only against each other, and they don't have any tournament play, any non-league games. And that, again, that creates a little bit of a problem that we simply don't see later in the season. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about early in the season, we add in the major U.S. categories, not a tier 1, but kind of like at the tier 2 level in the U.S. or the all category. We're adding 100, sometimes 200 teams a week to the rankings. So if you're a mid-level A team, let's say, you might go down 50 spots a week and actually be getting stronger because we're adding a bunch of teams above you. And it, you know, it's confusing to people, but I kind of want to throw it out there, that's an issue that we see pretty extensively early in the season that we don't see much of late in the season because we're not adding nearly as many teams to the rankings who now meet the minimum goal or minimum game requirement. And what it points to is the rating data is really kind of what we encourage people to look at. What is a team's rating? How do you compare to the teams around you that you play in the division of your league or in your geography? You know, kind of focus it more on the rating over the ranking, because again, early in the season, if you're not at the top, you're likely moving down because some teams have been added above you into the rankings. And that's just the reality of the situation. And another way to kind of get that benefit is to use the last 10 math page, which is right next to the math page that Ian was showing earlier, but there's a last 10. You know, ideally what a team wants is their last 10, the rating in their last 10 games to be higher than their overall rating. That says, hey, you're improving as the season's going along. So just some insights there. And that that last 10 math tab is also a great indicator later in the season about, how you're doing. But just in general, once you've hit that 10 game mark, we tell teams, hey, you want that your average over the last 10 to be better than your average on the season. So.
Yeah, and I think there's early in the season you have some things that can maybe skew data or make your team appear that they're worse than they really are because they're constantly dropping 50 spots each week. But kind of once the data settles in, there's still what I'll call some movement items and external factors that kind of impact the rankings on a weekly basis when we're adding tens of thousands of new game scores each week. And part of that is, on a weekly basis, your team can perform above expected in a week, last weekend. You may have even won the tournament. Yet you don't see your team moving up in the rankings, or maybe you even see a shift down in the rankings. And some of that may be due to factors completely outside of your team's control. And kind of what do I mean by that? The first one is the density of the rankings. And that's really how close are the teams in front of you and behind you, rated to your team. In some places you may be in a very dense spot where there's 20, 30 teams, within 0.1 or 0.2 of each other. If you're at the top end or bottom end, there may not be a team within a half rating point of you. So that density does matter because more dense areas are going to have more, ranking movement. And that means it may not be reflective of your actual performance. And so kind of back to Neil's point, focusing on that team rating will tell you more than that ranking number, if you will. The top rated team at an age level also has an impact. The top rated team at every age level is a 99.99. And our age levels are 10U, 12U, 14U, and then all of midgets are together. And so 14U and 13Us are together, 12Us and 11Us are together. But the top, 12U team is going to be a 99.99. And if that team performs well in a given weekend, they may increase kind of their gap between the rest of the teams. And that ultimately kind of just pushes everyone down a little bit. And oftentimes, we're talking a couple hundreds, 0.05 or something like that. But it does have an impact, and it can, especially late in the season, negate your team's performing well and your rating increasing at times. So there's some of that. There's geographic shifts due to new tie-in games and new tournaments. That usually happens, early in the season, as Neil mentioned on the last slide. But, at times, if you're a Staten Island in Alaska, without tie-in games, we don't actually know how good you are. And so when you play those first tie-in games, your rating could shift, 3 or 4 points almost. But those tie-in games are what we need. Those are kind of those accuracy, they're kind of the key to the accuracy, if you will. If we only had the games, it would kind of be all Stat Islands. The performance of the teams around you can have an impact, similar to the density of the rankings. You can have a good weekend, but a team behind you may have had a slightly better weekend, and so they actually jumped you and whatnot. And that's where kind of understanding that team rating on a week-to-week basis, can be more informative. Your opponent's performance as well as your opponent's performances. And don't get me wrong, it's a minor factor, but as Neil kind of touched on earlier, it can definitely impact your schedule. If all of your opponents, all of your league performed bad on a big tournament weekend, well, that may impact, the rest of your schedule. Their ratings may drop and your schedule may drop. There's also kind of what I'll call more team/game factors, injuries, bad calls, reffing, all that. And ultimately, we don't take any of those into account. They can have an impact. If your team's missing their starting goalie, that can definitely have an impact. But and everybody's a strong word. There are people who like to complain, when their team's dealing with an adverse situation and say, hey, this game shouldn't count. We were missing our starting goalie or our three best players. But they never think that, their best games probably came against opponents in a similar situation as well. And so, those things happen on both ends of the spectrum. Generally, they kind of even out over the season, but definitely can have an impact.
One of the things that we've added in the last year or so on the membership portal is schedule analysis, kind of insights and analysis key. So we kind of color code your upcoming games based on the rating difference between you and your upcoming scheduled opponents. You can see the key there for those of you who can see the slide. Kind of goes from green from well matched teams to a red, which is more like a game not recommended. Generally speaking, we'd say games with teams rated more than 6 points apart are rarely competitive, virtually never won by the underdog, and usually result in bad things for youth hockey, quite frankly. But we look overall at we've been talking about for years now an 80-10-10 rule. We don't think that games between two teams rated from like 3 to 6 points apart should never be played. We think that they should be played, basically at about 20% of your schedule. You want 80% of your games to be with teams within 3 goals, 3 points. We would say it's okay to have about 10% that you're the favorite in, 10% that you're likely to lose it. Those games do offer opportunities to see what that next level of play is for your kids. Hey, this is what you guys should be aspiring to be like. Or, and when you're the favorite, hey, it's an opportunity to get some kids more reps than normal. So more reps, get some game scores, build some confidence, those kind of things. So we provide this information into the membership portal so that people can kind of have a quick look at how one might look at their upcoming games. In short, we think that non-competitive games do negatively impact the sport. From the very beginning, I built this to take those games out of the sport. Bad games stunt player development, and they hurt player retention into the sport. And ultimately, while we think, yeah, it's okay to have a kind of an unevenly matched game against an opponent here and there, having those wild mismatches and having too many is a real problem for the sport of hockey.
Yeah, I think, ultimately and kind of, the reason Neil created it was for scheduling purposes. And really the goal there was fostering player development, increasing retention rates and creating a fun experience, both on and off the ice. And whether you're a parent, a coach or a hockey director, or, you're a league official, MYHockey can really help you with that player development and retention aspect. And, when you understand the team ratings, when you understand the math, some of the art behind it a little bit, I think it can help, whether it's your team, your family, your league, improve kind of their product offering there. And so, the goal really was to help you guys understand the team ratings, the math a little bit better, but then, using that in practice, to foster player development and, create that enjoyable experience on the ice. And so we hope you guys kind of enjoyed the presentation and were able to take away a few items there. We have a decent amount of questions kind of lined up here. So we're going to hop over into the Q&A.
Hey, Ian, Kirk Peterson asked 29 minutes ago. Sorry, Kirk, that we didn't jump on this earlier. How are game scores uploaded into the site? Is it controlled, or can anyone send in results? Ian, you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I can touch on that. Kirk, we have a couple different methods. On a high level, yes, anyone can enter game results into the system. We have you must create a guest account, but any guest can enter a game result. Guest entered scores do go through a reviewal/approval process to ensure that they're, legit and accurate. So it can lead to a delay at times if you are entering guest scores. That's especially true early in the season when we have thousands and we're dealing with probably our busiest time. So feel free to send us an email if you're not seeing any kind of movement or approval there. We also have memberships. We have division volunteers. We have a network of about 1,000 volunteers that help out with specific divisions. And then we have some what I'll call automations. We work with our partners at GameSheet, our partners at Crossbar, and then we work with some individual leagues to automate some of their game results as well. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. A lot of it is grassroots driven there, and kind of is the hockey community. So what we did 430,000 last year, Neil. It's not going to be just the three of us. So we encourage participation, and if you have any questions or run into any issues, don't hesitate to reach out there, Kirk.
Yeah, Ian, one of the terms we've used is we crowdsource this stuff. We crowdsource almost the entire site in a sense of, we don't know everything. We don't have it all cornered, and we can't get the answer to every question. At times we need and we appreciate the input from the larger hockey community. We do have, like Ian said, we have an API with GameSheet, so we get a lot of their game scores in pretty much automatically. But that's a fraction of what happens in youth hockey. So we definitely need, input from others. Moving forward on the next question, John asked something maybe a little bit more towards me. How does the original rating get determined, especially for first game points? Well, John, I may not nail my answer here, but fundamentally, we don't run the first rankings update until the end of September, because you need interplay in critical mass of games before the system really works. And what you're seeing in a few cases, when we talked about statistical islands earlier, is when there's not enough games and not enough interplay, there's no accuracy. A complex point here is when I originally started the site, the average rating of the teams was 0. there were a bunch of teams. Half the teams were negatively rated, half were positively rated. About 18 years ago, I realized that that had a negative connotation. So we started bumping the top team to 99.99, something like 17, 18 years ago. And what that means is, okay, so now everyone's in the positive zone. There's no negatively rated teams. But what happens with Stat Islands and other stuff like that is they get kind of put to the average. And what we don't do is pre-rate teams in any way, shape, or form. You have to be in the interconnected web of games at an age level, and if you are, the algorithm kind of spits you out kind of where you belong. But there is no pre-weighting. There's no original activity at all. As Ian stated in the presentation, every team starts every week at 0. We run the algorithm. It takes minutes. Even more than that in collectively, but at each age level it takes minutes, and then ultimately it spits out the rating for I think we have like 6,000 peewee teams these days, so it chugs along for a while, spits that out, but there's no pre-weighting.
Neil, I'm gonna hop over to the chat. There's a couple here. Adam kind of asked what are some factors that lead to games being not counting? And then Eric asked, how do you handle ratings between major and minor teams and between levels, different levels like Bantam versus a midget team? Kind of go hand in hand. There are what I'll consider non-counting games, games that aren't factored into the math. And, I mentioned the age levels earlier. Everything within an age level counts. If you're a 12U boys team, all games against 12U boys teams, 11U boys teams, Canada, 12U, those all count. What doesn't count is games against girls teams, for example, at the 12U level. We do allow those to count at the squirt age level, boys and girls, because there's a lot of interplay. Kids haven't really hit puberty yet, and there's a lot of interplay, which allows us to kind of accurately rank them all together. That starts to disappear at the 12U level. So 12U and above, boys versus girls games are considered non-counting. Any game against another age level would be considered counting. So down to Eric's
not non-counting, Ian.
Yes, a non-counting. Down to Eric's question, a game between a bantam and a midget team, there is no impact. We do allow, members and volunteers to enter those games, but they'll be grayed out on the rating math tab. They're strictly cosmetic there. So, I think that answers both questions. Kind of the major versus minor birth year stuff, Eric, does count. The mixed age level, doesn't count. So I think I touched on both of those there, Neil.
No, excellent. I think I'm going to switch back over to Q&A. There was one that was kind of applicable to me. Sarah asked, where do you find the schedule analysis key? That is in the membership portal. Full transparency, a full price individual membership is $40 for a season. It does go to pay salaries, not mine. I don't take one, but of the people who work full time, and there's a few part-time employees. I mean, bottom line is it goes to support that. It's $40 for the season. That's where the schedule analysis key is. We have an awful lot of data available, for free on the website. 99 point some percent of you guys, pay nothing for it, but there is that option, for those who do want to support the site. And that is, quite frankly, where the schedule analysis key is. A second question that I think we've answered, what is the initial rating? Again, it's 0. It's 0 every week. That is the starting point for the algorithm. and I probably can't say it enough, is literally there's no work that goes into, we can't pre-rate 26,000 teams. We're not interested in it. That is part of the beauty of the algorithm. We don't have to. But we do need enough games for accuracy. Maybe that's a weakness. Because we don't pre-rate, we need games. We need games that tie a group of teams with everything else, or they're not going to be accurately rated. And so that's the downside of not pre-rating.
Yeah. But Neil, I think another point is, every year things are slightly different at age levels. At times, an 80, in a middle of the pack team may be rated 80 at an age level. At another age level, the middle of the pack team may be rated 82. And so, year over year, there's changes. Pre-ranking those is nearly impossible to know that, hey, the NJYHL National A division is stronger this year. There's no way to know that. And then back to Neil's point,
yeah, Ian, I want to jump in and say, like, at Pee Wees this year, it might be a fact that there is a super team at Pee Wees that's pushing a lot of teams down, but we're seeing many teams 2 to 4 points lower than we might have otherwise expected them to be at the Pee Wee level. We're not seeing that at Squirts. We're not seeing it at Bantams, but there's some nuance year over year, and that in some cases is unexpected. Now, we also think that maybe over time, the average Pee Wee teams are going to inch up, but there's some nuance here that is kind of unpredictable. But if they're Shattuck St. Mary's 18U team this year is exceedingly strong, they're pushing some of the midgets down this year. So Pee Wees and midgets are kind of lower than we saw them last year. And that, again, some random nuance to the ratings. And if we pre-rated teams, again, we'd probably be messing that all up because of that, if you will.
Heading over into the chat, Todd asked, is there a limit to how many teams a membership can be tied to? Todd, at an individual membership level, there is a maximum of 3 team profiles. There are exceptions to that in certain cases, with individuals who have 4 children playing and things like that. There's also another option to gain more team profiles, and that's really kind of buying that second team membership. There, we'll give you an additional 3 team profiles. There is a little bit of a renewal discount as well, but that's probably the most I've ever seen anyone want or need is up to 6. So if you need anything, Todd, please reach out. We can try to get you all squared away there. Neil, are you over in the chat?
Yeah, I'm in the chat. I think we've addressed a lot of these, quite frankly. There's some kind of redundant ones we've already, that we've answered. So I don't want to kind of duplicate. Yeah. I'm trying to see if I think that any of these are new, and I apologize if I'm ignoring one of yours.
I think Rishi had one. How often are you trying to update or improve the algorithm? And good question. I think, and Neil's more the mathematician algorithm guy. But I'll speak from my perspective, from a business operations perspective. We're always trying to look at things, better understand the data, analyze the data. We recently had actually an intern analyze what's the difference between a boys Pee Wee team and a girls Pee Wee team. And she was analyzing game scores and things like that. So we're always trying to learn new things, try to see if there's any tweaks we can make to improve it. But I'll be honest, it's been largely unchanged for 15 to 20 years. And part of that is it's been incredibly accurate and it works. And I think it would be wrong to be complacent. But at the same time, when it does work like it has, and it's kind of proven over its track record there, there's not a whole lot of reason to make any major tweaks to it. And
the last thing we looked at, and it's a valid thing, is an overtime game or a shootout win maybe less of a win than a regulation win. And we've thought about this for years. We've done some analysis, and ultimately it almost makes no difference for any teams. You lose a few shootouts, you win a few shootouts, and there's a few teams out there that it would make a difference on. But if it does, it's a team that's winning all their shootouts, overtime games, or losing them all, basically. And there's a point that we've thought, well, the exception of the teams that are doing that, maybe they deserve the bump or the hit for it. And ultimately, there is a data accuracy issue that we've also been mildly concerned about. Is right now it doesn't matter, and if you put overtime or shootout, if it was it, because there's not a difference between an overtime win and a regulation win right now. That's the last thing we've done analysis on, but ultimately did not tweak the algorithm because of it. It's one that we could actually have an hour-long debate about, quite frankly. But when we saw that it was making virtually no difference in the ratings, we've decided not to incorporate it. That analysis was done a couple years ago, and that's where we still stand today. So just a little update on that. But Ian's right. I mean, the core of it is actually largely unchanged since the last time we tweaked the maximum goal differential about 17, 18 years ago.
And to take it a step further, kind of with the next question, have you ever considered implementing into other sports? We actually use this algorithm pretty much essentially the exact same, outside of some changes to goal differential in other sports. We work in the lacrosse space. We partnered with close to 20 high school governing bodies, if you will, athletic associations, and do a similar kind of platform for lacrosse called laxnumbers.com. We've worked directly with the Ontario Lacrosse Association for probably over a decade now. We've done stuff in racing. We've done stuff in with CYO and basketball. We're always looking to help organizations, both in hockey and out of hockey, improve kind of their experience, their family's experience. And so I think there was a question earlier, there was a comment earlier, like baseball could use this. And that's one that probably comes up a couple times a year. And quite frankly, baseball is a massive undertaking. We're talking 26,000 teams on the hockey side. Baseball, there's probably double that, maybe triple that.
Ian, I would tell you that it might be 10 times that.
And quite frankly, Neil and I simply don't have, most importantly, the knowledge. We don't know the baseball market. We don't know the football or basketball markets at times, and we don't really have a whole lot of interest in going and trying to do that ourselves. Now, the right partners come through or something like that, it's a different story. But Neil and I are both hockey guys through and through. Hockey's given us a lot, in our lives, if you will. And part of it's kind of giving back to the hockey community and trying to help the hockey community specifically. So
that is our priority. Lacrosse has worked really well over the years, and we dabble in other places, but it has to make sense. An undertaking of the whole youth baseball world is not something that makes sense. A lot of clubs have 5 teams at an age level. You got to make sure that you're getting those all accurately entered, that you're not mixing up the blue team and the black team. And we have those issues in hockey, but we've done a pretty good job over the years of keeping that straight. So we've definitely spread our wings a little bit, but also are a little bit fearful of some overly daunting sports like baseball. And even our basketball stuff has been smaller scale. It isn't like the whole world of AAU youth basketball. That again would be one of those that is just an absolute animal. Maybe with the right partner, but not something we're going to do specifically. So anyway.
no,
Ian, is there? I think we're a couple minutes over. Anything else that sitting out there that we need to address?
I think that covered them all. I'm doing one more look on the Q&A side. I think that covered them all, Neil.
Yeah, I think it did.
If anyone didn't get a chance to ask a question, didn't want to ask it in a public setting, was having computer troubles, feel free to shoot us an email at director@myhockeyrankings.com, or use the contact us form. Those go directly to our admin team as well. We'll be happy to kind of assist you there and answer any questions you may have as well. But we greatly appreciate you guys all coming out. Hopefully you gained a thing or two from us, and you can use it to improve, whether it's your family, your team, your club's experience, this season. So best of luck to everyone. Appreciate you guys coming out. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're always here and happy to help.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.